I'm standing in a tiny cafe in Florence at 8:30 in the morning, jet-lagged, confident, and dangerously American. The menu is in Italian, but I don't need it. I smile and say, "Hi, can I get an iced coffee?" The barista freezes, not metaphorically. He actually stops wiping the counter and looks at me like I just asked if gravity is optional. He blinks once and says, "Un, café." "Yes," I say, nodding hard, "but iced." He tilts his head. "Café." He points at the espresso machine like it's a courtroom exhibit. "With ice," I add, miming cubes dropping into a glass. There's a pause, a long one, the kind where other customers stop pretending they're not listening. Finally, he shrugs, pulls a tiny porcelain cup, makes a perfect espresso, and drops a single ice cube into it. It hisses like it's offended. He slides it over. "Prego." I stare at it. He stares at me. I say, "Is there, like, more?" "More what?" He asks. "Coffee." "This is coffee," he says gently. "The way you explain death to a child." I laugh, because I think we're joking. He doesn't. He leans in and says, "Americans always want to change coffee." I take a sip. It's hot, and cold, and wrong. Everyone in the cafe watches me drink it. Waiting. I nod politely, leave €1, and walk out into the street holding the saddest cup of my life. That's when it hit me. I didn't order coffee. I challenged a belief system. And this was just the beginning. I thought it was a language problem, maybe a translation issue, until the next country, the next cafe, and the next waiter all reacted the same way. And that's when the pattern started forming right in front of me. I thought Florence was a fluke. One dramatic barista. One bad morning. Then I landed in Paris and tried again. "Bonjour, iced coffee," I said, smiling like someone who learns nothing. The waiter didn't freeze. He smiled back. "Coffee. Cold?" he asked. "Yes." "With milk?" "Sure." He nodded, walked away, returned with a hot espresso and a pitcher of milk, and said, "You wait." He left. That was it. That's when I realized this wasn't Italy. This was Europe. Every country, same reaction, different flavor of judgment. In Barcelona, a man laughed and said, "It is winter." In Berlin, a woman corrected my pronunciation before denying my order. In Amsterdam, someone handed me ice and coffee, separately like IKEA furniture. After the fourth country, I stopped blaming language. I've traveled enough. I've lived abroad. I know when I'm the problem. I'd order confidently, explaining too much. In the States, iced coffee is just coffee over ice. They'd listen politely, then respond with silence, or worse, concern. One barista leaned over the counter and said, "Why do you want to ruin it?" Another asked, "Is something wrong with hot coffee in America?" Huh. A third just sighed and said, "Americans." And it wasn't just me. Every time another tourist ordered before me, I could tell. The accent, the confidence, the phrase, "Can I get?" The cafe would brace itself. Cups would stop clinking. Someone would whisper. I started recognizing the look. Curiosity, then confusion, then quiet superiority. So I began collecting these moments, not on purpose. They just kept happening. Different cities, same script. We'd walk in wanting caffeine and walk out with a sociology lesson. I realized this wasn't about coffee temperature. It was about systems, about rules you don't see until you break them. By then, I wasn't even thirsty. I was curious. I wanted to know how far the misunderstanding went. I'd watch locals order with 2 words and perfect certainty. No questions, no options, just trust. Meanwhile, I was negotiating beverages like a hostage exchange, pointing at menus, explaining ice ratios, smiling too much. The more I explained, the more suspicious they became. Somewhere between Rome and Vienna, I stopped ordering coffee and started testing boundaries. And just when I thought I understood the pattern, I walked into a cafe in Vienna, ordered carefully, confidently, respectfully, and discovered there was still another level of wrong. It didn't confuse the waiter, it offended him. And that was the moment I realized polite confusion was over. From here on, the reactions stopped being quiet. They became instructional, emotional, and occasionally brutal. And that's when things truly escalated. In ways I never expected. Not even a little. At all. Honestly speaking, the first mild case happened in Rome again. Different cafe. Same confidence. I stepped up and said, "Iced coffee, please." The barista smiled, relieved. "Ah," he said, "Americano." I nodded. "Yes, iced." He paused, then pulled a long espresso, filled a mug with hot water, slid it to me, and waited. "Ice?" I asked. He pointed outside. "Winter." I laughed, took it, and realized he'd solved a different problem. In his mind, I didn't want cold coffee. I wanted less coffee. Reflection hit me as I walked out. Americans scale drinks. Europeans define them. The second one was Paris, and it felt almost kind. I asked softly this time, "Is there something like iced coffee?" The waitress leaned in and whispered, "You are American?" I said yes. She smiled. "Okay," she said, "you want café frappé, but not really." She brought me a glass of cold milk and a hot espresso on the side. "Mix," she said, already turning away. I stirred like a child doing science. It tasted fine. Everyone around me drank silently. Reflection followed. In Europe, customization is homework. You finish it yourself. Then came Madrid, where timing mattered more than temperature. It was 11 in the morning. I asked for iced coffee. The man behind the counter frowned. "After lunch," he said. "But I'm hot now," I replied. He shrugged. "Coffee has schedule." He served me hot espresso anyway. A man next to me nodded approvingly. I drank it, standing, sweating, learning that coffee here isn't about comfort. It's about order. Reflection landed hard. Americans drink for feelings. Europeans drink for structure. The mildest one might have been Berlin. I tried German words, respectful tone. "Kalter Kaffee?" The barista corrected my grammar, then said, "That is old coffee." "Ah," I explained ice. She shook her head. "That is not a thing." She made me espresso, placed it down, and said, "Enjoy coffee." No anger, no joke, just truth. I enjoyed it. Reflection surprised me. Sometimes, resistance isn't hostility, it's preservation. Amsterdam was cheerful about it, which almost made it worse. I ordered iced coffee. The barista laughed. "Sure," he said. "One moment." He returned with a hot coffee, a tall glass of ice, and set them down separately. "You make," he said. I hesitated. "Like this?" I asked, pouring slowly. "Yes," he said, nodding proudly. The coffee splashed, ice cracked. People watched. A woman behind me whispered, "Americans are brave." I tasted it, watery. He smiled. "Next time, you know." I nodded, pretending this was normal. Reflection followed me, outside. In Europe, freedom means responsibility. You asked for change, so you own the result. Zurich was the most polite rejection. I asked carefully, "Is iced coffee possible?" The man adjusted his glasses. "Possible, yes," he said. "Correct? No." He explained slowly. Coffee temperature affects flavor. Ice destroys balance. I nodded like a student. "So no?" I asked. He smiled. So espresso. He made it perfectly and waited while I drank. Good? He asked. Very, I said. A woman nearby smiled approvingly. No one laughed. No one argued. Reflection settled quietly. Some cultures don't adapt because they already solved the problem, and they don't need your suggestions. I started realizing these were lessons, not refusals. Every mild correction trained me to stop explaining myself. The quieter the cafe, the louder the message. Order simply. Accept limits. Respect craft. I didn't know it then, but this gentle discipline was preparation. Because soon, the explanations would stop, the smiles would fade, and the reactions would become very, very loud. Because in the next country, the waiter didn't explain. He took my order personally. The room changed, the silence sharpened, and that's when the misunderstandings stopped being mild and started becoming performances, lessons delivered publicly, with witnesses, emotion, and no escape. I had no idea how intense the next encounter would be, or how fast politeness could turn into something confrontational, unforgettable, and slightly humiliating for everyone involved. Standing there with a cup I never wanted anyway. Vienna was where politeness finally snapped. I walked into a cafe that looked like a museum. Marble floors, gold trim, silence so thick it felt expensive. I rehearsed my order in my head, simplified, respectful, humble. When it was my turn, I smiled and said, "Espresso, with ice, please." The waiter didn't blink. He leaned forward and said, "No." Not no like unavailable. No like morally incorrect. I laughed nervously and said, "Okay, what do you recommend?" He straightened up and said, "Coffee." The people behind me had stopped breathing. He made an espresso with surgical focus and placed it in front of me. I drank it while he watched, arms crossed like a disappointed uncle. That was escalation level 1. Level 2 happened in Copenhagen. I ordered iced coffee, and the barista called another barista over. They discussed me like a faulty appliance. One said, "Maybe cold brew." The other shook his head and said, "He wants ice." They turned back to me. "Why?" one asked. I said, "Because it's refreshing." He nodded slowly and said, "Water is refreshing." They served me a glass of water and an espresso. Problem solved. The cafe agreed. In Prague, the escalation went public. I ordered iced coffee and the waitress laughed out loud. She turned to the room and said, "American iced coffee." People looked up. Someone clapped once. She smiled at me and said, "YouTube." I shook my head, mortified. She said, "You want ice cream coffee?" Before I could answer, it arrived. A tall glass, ice cream, chocolate drizzle, whipped cream. Dessert masquerading as caffeine. Everyone waited for my reaction. I tasted it. It was incredible. The room cheered. I bowed slightly. In Stockholm, the lecture began. I asked for iced coffee. The barista sighed and said, "We must talk." He explained extraction, temperature, respect. I nodded through a TED talk I didn't enroll in. "Ice hides mistakes," he said. "We do not hide mistakes." He made espresso. Perfect. I drank it in silence. I felt corrected. In Lisbon, kindness turned sharp. I ordered iced coffee. The man smiled and said, "Tourist?" I said yes. He said, "Then trust me." He served espresso. I asked about ice. He laughed softly and said, "You don't need it." It wasn't advice. It was closure. That's when I realized escalation wasn't about anger. It was about education. Every reaction was a lesson delivered at full volume. The more I insisted, the more the room joined in. I stopped being a customer and became a case study. And just when I thought the performances had peaked, when I believed the message couldn't get louder, I walked into one cafe where the waiter didn't explain. Didn't joke, didn't teach. He just looked at me, took my order, and decided it was time for the final exam. At some point, the joke stopped being about coffee and started being about how Americans think systems work everywhere globally. Americans are raised inside a world where choice equals quality, and more options mean better service by default, always assumed. If something exists, hot, cold must be an upgrade, not a philosophical disagreement requiring a conversation first thing there, apparently. In the US, coffee is a platform, a base product designed to be modified endlessly without judgment, socially accepted behavior. Milk, syrups, sizes, temperatures, names that sound invented. All of it signals freedom and personal control over daily rituals everywhere. In most of Europe, coffee is not a platform. It is a finished idea that survived centuries unchanged, deliberately intact. You don't customize a finished idea. You either accept it or reveal you don't understand it culturally, yet fully enough. That's why waiters reacted like teachers correcting homework instead of employees fulfilling a request inside public cultural classrooms' daily rituals. Education plays a role too, because many European baristas train formally, learning extraction like chemistry through apprenticeships and certification paths. Ice represents dilution, shortcuts, and hiding flaws. Everything that formal training teaches you to avoid instinctively professionally, culturally deeply embedded. Americans see ice as refreshment. Europeans see it as interference with balance, flavor, intention, craft, tradition, meaning, purpose, structure, identity. Neither side is wrong. They are operating from different definitions of respect shaped by history, systems, expectations, education, habits, norms. Americans respect preference. Europeans respect process, and those values collide at the counter, publicly, awkwardly, visibly, instantly, every single time. The louder the explanation, the more suspicious it sounds in a culture built on silent consensus and shared assumptions daily. That's why smiling confidence backfires and over-explaining reads like insecurity or ignorance rather than enthusiasm, curiosity, openness, learning humility. Once I saw that, the embarrassment shifted into understanding and then into fascination about human behavior, norms, systems, rituals, design. Coffee was just the lens. The real story was how cultures protect what they value through rules, reactions, boundaries, enforcement. Europeans weren't rejecting me. They were defending meaning with consistency and pride, earned slowly, historically, collectively, intentionally, carefully, publicly, daily. Americans weren't ignorant. We were applying a successful system in the wrong environment without recalibration, awareness, humility, context, adjustment, translation. That mismatch creates comedy, conflict, and moments that feel personal but aren't actually emotionally, culturally, individually, intentionally, malicious, hostile, planned. It's why no one yelled, but everyone corrected, instructed, or quietly judged together. Collectively, subtly, efficiently, calmly, socially, openly, consistently. Understanding that made the next encounters easier, but also much more intense emotionally, socially, psychologically, publicly, memorably, unpredictably, unexpectedly, dramatically. Because once you understand the rule, breaking it becomes a choice, not a mistake anymore, consciously, knowingly, deliberately, intentionally, visibly. And when you break a rule, knowingly, people stop correcting and start reacting emotionally, theatrically, personally, publicly, forcefully, seriously, immediately. That's when mild confusion turns into performance. Instruction turns into confrontation slowly, visibly, inevitably, dramatically, socially, collectively, memorably, intensely, publicly. I didn't know it yet, but the next stories wouldn't be gentle anymore. At all, emotionally, socially, culturally, publicly, personally. They would be loud, public, educational, and impossible to pretend were misunderstandings anymore by anyone involved, watching, listening, witnessing, nearby. I had crossed from ignorance into awareness, and awareness changes the stakes entirely, permanently, emotionally, socially, culturally, psychologically, dramatically, forever. The cafes stopped being classrooms and started becoming stages for conflict, humor, power, authority, identity, performance, ritual, dominance, culture, clash. And the next waiter didn't want to teach me. He wanted to prove something publicly, decisively, definitively, emotionally, socially, finally. The first peak moment happened in Naples, and it stopped being funny immediately. I ordered iced coffee calmly, knowingly, fully aware of the rule I was breaking. The barista stared at me and said, "You know we don't do that." I said, "I know, but I still want it." Silence spread. He turned to another barista and said, "He knows." That sentence changed everything. He made espresso slowly, deliberately, theatrically, then filled a glass with ice, poured the coffee over it, watched it turn cloudy, and slid it to me. "Drink," he said. Everyone watched. I drank it. He nodded once. "Now you know why." No lesson, just consequence. The second peak happened in Paris again, but this time it became public theater. I ordered iced coffee in English. The waiter didn't answer. He turned to the bar behind him and said, "We have an American." The room laughed softly. He asked me, "Why iced?" I said, "Because I like it." He smiled. "Then you like wrong." He made espresso, placed it down and said, "This is coffee." I reached for it. He stopped me. "Taste." I tasted. He nodded. "Good." Then he added ice himself and said, "Now taste." I did. "Worse?" he asked. I nodded. Applause. I paid. I left. I learned. The third peak was in a tiny cafe in Rome, late afternoon. I didn't order iced coffee. I ordered espresso. The barista smiled approvingly. Then my friend stepped forward and said, "Can I get iced coffee?" The barista looked at me like I betrayed him. "You taught him nothing," he said. I tried to explain. "He's American too." The barista sighed, shook his head, and said, "Okay, watch." He made espresso, drank it himself, then pointed at my friend. "Now you order." My friend froze. "Hot coffee," he said. The room relaxed. The barista smiled. "Good," he said. "You are learning." I realized then the lesson wasn't about ice. It was about submission to process. These moments weren't humiliating. They were clarifying. Once you cross the line knowingly, people stop protecting your feelings. They stop translating. They demonstrate. They perform. They make the invisible rule visible through pressure and witnesses. I wasn't being mocked. I was being initiated forcefully into a value system that doesn't negotiate once you understand it. The laughter wasn't cruelty. It was relief. Relief that the system still held. That tradition won. That the rules worked even when challenged openly. And strangely, once I stopped resisting, the tension disappeared. When I ordered espresso without hesitation, I was invisible again. Accepted, normal, trusted. That's when I understood the peak moments weren't punishments. They were tests. Tests of whether I would adapt or insist, whether I valued comfort or meaning, whether I wanted my way or their world. But the story doesn't end with surrender. Because after all that learning, all that adaptation, all that respect, there was one final moment where I thought I had mastered it completely. And that's when I made the smallest mistake of all. One word. One assumption, and it triggered the loudest reaction. Yet, from the last person I ever expected. I stopped ordering iced coffee long before the trip ended. Not because I stopped liking it, but because I understood what it represented. It wasn't a drink anymore. It was a question. Every time I asked for it, I was asking a room full of people to bend a system that wasn't built to bend. The pattern was clear once I stepped back. Americans arrive with confidence and customization, assuming preference equals respect. Europeans respond with structure and tradition, assuming process equals care. Neither side is trying to dominate. They're protecting different things. One protects choice. The other protects meaning. What surprised me most wasn't the resistance. It was how quickly the tension vanished when I adapted. The moment I ordered espresso without hesitation, the room relaxed. No lectures, no performances, just quiet approval and good coffee. I wasn't rewarded for being right. I was rewarded for listening. Travel doesn't punish ignorance. It punishes certainty. The louder I explained myself, the more foreign I sounded. The quieter I became, the more I learned. Somewhere between the fifth café and the 10th correction, I realized humility travels better than confidence ever could. I used to think culture shock came from big things like language or laws. It doesn't. It comes from tiny rituals you didn't know were sacred. Coffee just happened to be the altar. And the funny part is, I still drink iced coffee at home. I just don't expect the rest of the world to agree with me anymore. Respecting a culture doesn't mean adopting it forever. It means recognizing when your preferences are not universal truths. That lesson stuck harder than any espresso ever could. And just when I thought the story was over, one final interaction reminded me that understanding a rule doesn't mean you'll break it. So now, whenever someone asks me what surprised me most about traveling Europe, I don't say museums or food. I say coffee. Because a simple order taught me more about culture than any guidebook ever could. If you've ever walked into another country assuming your way was neutral, congratulations, you've been me. Tell me your worst travel misunderstanding in the comments, bonus points if it involved food or public embarrassment. If you enjoyed this, like the video, subscribe for more stories where small habits cause massive confusion, and share it with the friend who still asks for ranch everywhere. And next time you travel, remember, sometimes the smartest move is to stop customizing and just drink the espresso. Trust me, it tastes better when you earn it slowly, standing at the counter surrounded by locals, saying nothing. Finally, understanding you were the strange one all along without ice or excuses.